Welcome to the Changing Conversations podcast by SGS. This is the second episode in our series titled Trust in AI. My name is Tomislav, Lead Innovation Technologist at SGS, and today we will continue our exploration of the critical aspects of AI regulation. In this episode, our experts will discuss the role of the TIC industry, how rapid development of AI technology is addressed, and about the shared responsibility across the AI technology stack. Joining me today are Jeremy Rollison, Head of EU Policy at Microsoft, and Gabriele Mazzini from the European Commission, Architect and Lead Author of the EU AI Act, who will provide valuable insights into these topics. I would like to discuss a little bit the role of the TIC industry. So testing, inspection, certification, that's where SGS is part of, with many competitors here. Obviously, any new regulation has also impact on our industry as well, because usually we are the independent third party providing all kinds of trust services around technologies. And AI in particular is obviously a very interesting technology for us as well. So we are using it internally in our services, but we are especially interested in when our customers are using AI systems and when they now need to comply to these kinds of new regulation, and what we as an industry and we as a TIC company need to do and to develop and provide so that we actually address the need of our customers. And the EU AI Act has some challenges for us as well, but especially the AI technology itself. So compared to other technologies, an AI system is highly complex. It requires all kinds of discipline which need to come together. We discussed all kinds of risks like bias, robustness, security. And for all those kind of things, you need different people, different expertise, different education and background in order to develop services around that. And when we are talking about developing and providing services to our customers, we talk about testing AI system, we're talking about auditing AI system, the quality management systems around the AI system, and so on. And when we are looking into what do we need to do in order to properly assess an AI system and basically give a certain level of assurance that everything complies to the existing regulation and is compliant to existing standards, we need a diverse set of people. Bias experts are different from security experts. They're different, they have a different background. And at the same time, we're also competing with the AI developer companies, right? So it's not just those people working at TIC companies are completely different people than those who are developing this kind of technologies. Usually the people working in the TIC industry are coming from companies who are developing a certain type of technologies. And that's where our challenges are. So we need to develop the services. We are developing the services. We need to have the necessary know-how compared to technologies which are regulated for many, many years and decades. The systems are much more complex. We need much more expertise in this area. It's much more broad expertise required and so on. And on the other hand, it's also the standards which are still lacking. There's a lot of standards in development, a lot of standards already published by ISO, IEC, for example, and IEEE around various aspects of AI systems. And we need more. And we and other TIC companies are involved in the standardization process. We provide feedback and provide input, all kinds of activities. But that's where we still need to do a lot in order that at the end, the services we are providing are also comparable across the industry. So we need standards that we can show compliance to, that if we have a company developing AI systems, then we always can develop something proprietary, but it's much better if we have an international standards everybody agreed on, which has been developed by all key players from the industry, and take this standard then to show compliance to this standard in order basically also to argue that the system is now compliant to the regulation. So it's compared to other technologies, it's resource intensive, you need a lot of expertise, and we still need to develop a lot of standards in order to basically have a full set. And ideally, we will have someday in the future even a full certification scheme on the European Union level. So meaning there is a scheme ready, which basically everybody from the TIC industry can apply, and we can work inside of the scheme where everything is standardized from an assessment point of view, and also for our customer, everything is clear how the whole certification process can look like. So I would also like to address a little bit where to start from our perspectives. Since from our customers, we get a lot of questions around what they need to do, how they need to prepare, which translates into what kind of services we need to develop. Some companies are better prepared, some less so. There is a certain level of uncertainty. And as a TIC company, we're talking to our customers, as we're also preparing for the new type of regulation, I think it's important at the beginning is to answer some quick key questions, to get to discussions with the customers and really start doing reviews and pre-assessment and see what's going on, and then try to help the customers to figure out those answers at the beginning, so that at the end a roadmap can be laid out in order that they know what they have to do in order to comply then into respectively 3 years when the regulation becomes effective. We also hear a lot about what needs to be done in terms of testing and auditing. Isn't auditing enough for an AI system? Obviously, there's different approaches. It will depend on the risk profile and on the requirements, which should be done. I would say auditing at the beginning is probably, if we need to think about what kind of typical TIC services we need to start with, auditing is probably the first one, because it's easier to set up once you have the expertise in hand, once you have certain standards. You go, you look at the AI system and audit the documentation, talk to the developer, see its results and evidence that all the risks are addressed appropriately. I think at the later stage, independent testing has quite some value, but that requires more standards, which allows us to have comparable results, repeatable results, and also requires the necessary tooling around that. I would say from a testing perspective, one of the bigger challenges from our perspective is that's not just one AI system. That's not one set of tools you need to apply and you can suddenly address all kinds of AI applications. There's different models. Inside of the AI ecosystem, there's different kinds of AI models, different types of architectures, different types of layers of technology which are used, which require different tools, different expertise again. So it's the beginning, there will probably be some focus, and then time to time, we can broaden the testing capabilities. So auditing from this perspective is again an easier task to accomplish because you're not independently testing and you don't need the necessary infrastructure to address all kinds of application, but you can address it more quickly and more easily, especially considering how rapidly this technology evolves. So that were my thoughts, but I would also like to hear, Gabriele, from your point of view as the architect of the AI Act, how do you see the role of the TIC industry? How do you see our purpose in the whole system?
Absolutely. I mean, the role of that industry is essential, right? I mean, this is really the whole AI Act is premised in this NLF structure that requires, the existence of actually notified bodies that are able to perform controls on systems before they're placed on the market. This is really one of the fundamental choices we made. And therefore, it's absolutely essential that the TIC industry is able to deliver on that role. And I do believe, I share your comments around the fact that we kind of moved the needle probably with the AI Act in terms of challenges for the TIC industry, because we are requiring that industry to look into questions and risks that sort of going beyond the more traditional side of the TIC industry around perhaps health and safety, and indeed looking on questions around bias, around discrimination. I think we are certainly going beyond that. And this poses you in the position need to have to probably fill certain gaps in terms of talents and competences, which may pose some certain challenges. To be honest, this is also something we did consider from the beginning, in the sense that one of the reasons why we wanted to limit third-party conformity assessment to only a certain type of systems, notably the systems that are safety components of products, and only just one subset, at least this was in our proposal, of use cases in Annex 3, so the biometric system, was also one intentional choice to make sure that we give time for the industry to indeed be able to get up to speed. Otherwise, had we put an obligation to undergo third-party conformity assessment on all high-risk AI systems, this would have probably created a really bottleneck in terms of access to the market of high-risk AI systems. But of course, we try to introduce a mitigation factor, or at least a mechanism whereby, to the extent providers who are, of course, obliged, have to take the responsibility for ensuring compliance with the AI Act through self-assessment, they are not taking that seriously, there is the possibility for the Commission to actually trigger the third-party conformity assessment mechanism. So this was our departure point, which was actually maintained by the co-legislator to essentially leave most of the use cases in Annex 3 with a self-assessment. So therefore, there is no need to undergo a third-party certification, although of course they could. But giving the Commission the power to trigger that mechanism of third-party certification should, the self-assessment not be adequate.
Thank you. So, Jeremy, your point of view on the role of the TIC industry.
Well, I think, I agree with what's been said, and I certainly agree with Tomislav the way that, you had laid this out. I know that one of the reasons I think this is so tremendously important is also the international alignment of these rules as we see more and more regulations emerge, for compliance benefits, whether it's an international standard that could be audited by third parties. Ideally we have, standards that provide some of that presumption of conformity or certification against regulatory requirements that can be done for multiple sets of regulatory compliance. If you think of some of the standards that are developed at ISO, particularly for artificial intelligence management systems, we think those can go a long way towards identifying at least and providing conformity against some of the obligations that may be in the AI Act or in obligations coming out of rules from around the world. But we placed a high importance on standards and auditing thereof, in particular in the context of AI systems and regulatory compliance. Even our own responsible AI standard that we've developed internally, I think reflects a bit of that. And also the work that we're doing towards compliance with some of those relevant ISO standards. Appreciate what Gabriele had said, particularly in the context of third-party assessments. But when standards are there which can provide a degree of clarity and help for compliance with specific provisions, many of those third-party auditing systems against that and providing some of those certifications against those standards, those are really, really important bridges that I think can go a long way towards helping companies have a bit more clarity on compliance. It's a lot easier sometimes to understand the requirements relevant for certification against a particular standard than it may be to some of the regulatory requirements themselves. And while I don't think there's one standard that'll provide compliance with all obligations across the board, there are a lot already out there that we could leverage and I think provide great opportunities to kind of have more of that international alignment that we talked about and ensure that we have something a little bit more tangible and easier to achieve. So I think we're quite optimistic about that space.
One of the major challenges we face, and I would say that the certification industry in general, is when you have certification schemes and assessment on a specific type of technology, and the technology is rapidly evolving and developing. So the classical, or the traditional way, things are done in the certification industry, you assess, let's say, a product at a given point in time. You know how it complies at that point in time on to all the standards and regulation it has to comply. Then you issue a certificate, and then depending on the scheme, you maybe have another look at the product in 2-3 years or whatever. But for looking or trying to do the same for AI products seems to be quite difficult if you just look at how frequently AI models are updated. You get new data, you retrain your models, you redeploy your models, etc. So it won't, I would say the traditional way of certifying products might not be the best approach in addressing those challenges we have with AI technology. Now, AI is evolving drastically. This will also have impact on the regulation. So, Gabriele, how the UI Act considers this aspect, and what's the general idea in going to the future and in how to cope with the rapid development of this technology?
You posed there really two big questions.
Sorry.
But I'll try to address them both, synthetically as I can. So on the one hand, you posed the question around how does a certification mechanism can be adapted to the fact that we are dealing here with a product, like an AI system as a product that is by its nature rather evolving, right? So, or at least a specific product can be, as you say, you have a model, can be fine-tuned, and then can be further distributed, and then further fine-tuned. So the idea that, okay, you certify compliance at a certain moment in time, and then, that's it, or you would need indeed somewhat of, let's say, what happens with more traditional products, a modification that actually requires a whole change in maybe the manufacturing line. This is not something that is probably going to fit fully with AI systems that are by nature, as a software products, evolve much quicker. So that's certainly one question that we had back in 2019 when we started working on the AI Act. And of course, the moment we chose the NLF, and with a certain point in time in which products have to be certified, we knew that we are dealing there with software products that can be, modified rather in an agile fashion. And that is why, but already at the time, we were quite inspired by some work done by the FDA, looking at concepts like the so-called algorithm change protocol. So the fact that you may be able to still, maintain the system of ex-ante certification of systems that can evolve to some extent after certification. So that being said, this still remains, in my view, an area that requires, in the next few months, extensive work, both by researchers and, of course, the TIC industry, to really make sure that, the system remain, the overall system of certification of AI remains up to the, really to the task. Because ultimately, indeed, I still do believe that the approach of ensuring that those systems that are considered posing high risk are certified and therefore can be trusted on the market, I think this is an important proposition. But of course, it needs to work with a certification approach that is up to the task. The second question, very briefly, around, of course, the definition of AI. What is AI, and it evolves so fast? How do we make sure that regulation remains up to speed? I think, again, this is something that doesn't come as a surprise to me, because I actually spent a lot of time thinking about this, how to define AI back in 2019, because I knew, okay, the regulation will not be moved, will not be amended very quickly. I mean, that's a bit the nature of EU legislation. We see there is a certain lag of time before regulations are amended. So we want to make sure that we have a definition that stands the test of time. And at the same time, we want a definition that would be aligned as much as possible internationally. So that's where we started looking at the work done by the OECD. In 2019, they came up with a definition, quite abstract. But we felt also the limitation of that definition, because maybe that definition was good for a policy document, but maybe not so good for a legal text. And so we tried to introduce some corrections. I mean, one correction is, for instance, the indication that content should be one of the possible output of the system, because indeed we want to make sure that also generative AI per se, the fact that we generate new content, is also considered AI, not just decisions, recommendations, or predictions. But I would say most importantly, one of the choices we made was to include an annex to the proposal, including a number of techniques that would need to be used in order for the overall system to be considered AI. And the idea of the annex was, regardless of whether one may agree certain techniques should be included or not, was to exactly enable that legal certainty. So because we do have a much more specific indications of techniques, and the possibility for the Commission to update those techniques. So therefore, to allow, the regulation to remain up to date. The legislator decided to opt for a different approach. So we do not have that annex any longer. We do have a more elaborate definition in Article 3 and elaborate recital. But I mean, time will tell whether this is clear enough, or we need indeed to supplement those provisions with more specificities, in terms of guidance or implementing acts to ensure that indeed the regulation is clear enough to be applied by companies.
That sounds good. Thank you. Jeremy, may I ask you to share your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, standards aren't just related to the specific, model itself. I think that was one of the examples that was used, but there already are a lot of mitigation efforts that have to be made, even at just the organizational level. If you think of some of the standards that have emerged around GDPR and the like, while taxonomies have an important role to play, even the way that you're organized internally to mitigate risks, there's a whole host of considerations that I think, need to take into account if we're going to develop these systems responsibly. One of our calls for regulation in that space, reflects some of that insofar as, borrowing your KYC principles from the financial services industry, for example. We think it's important when there is this ecosystem that's out there that I've mentioned before, and an increasing amount of partnerships. Every company has a responsibility, but as you find yourself along different parts of that chain, it's more important than ever to kind of know your cloud, know your customer, and know your content. So rules can reflect that. And I think the EU AI Act does that to a degree, particularly when we're talking about knowing your content and the production of AI systems, through labeling requirements and the like. We think that can go a long way towards some of the concerns that have been raised around things like deep fakes. But when you're looking at certification and where it can come in, part of that relates to these know your customer concepts. We want to make sure there are certifications that are possible, so you can demonstrate compliance, you can demonstrate the due diligence that's been done to make sure that your organization is developing AI responsibly. And third-party certifications go a long way to that. So standards, because of the international alignment that we had mentioned before, go well beyond just one specific product or service. I think it also is important to kind of call out where that impacts organizational setups. And then beyond that, we hope that's an active space, because it's going to be important not just for EU AI Act, but for obligations that are emerging from the United States and from Japan and from Asia and the like. International standards provide a really important opportunity to have some alignment around some of that and make sure that compliance is easier than needing to, set up different processes and rules for compliance across an endless amount of jurisdictions potentially. But again, I think the role of standards really shouldn't be understated in that space. And the EU AI Act points to that in many instances. And we hope that many of the international standards that are already out there and that will continue to emerge be considered in a similar context.
All right. So my final question for today is discussing the following challenge. What we basically typically see from an AI system is that there's a technology stack, right? The different layers of technology used in order to happen at the end, and a very nice AI application, which also means that different components are coming from different suppliers. And considering that the EU AI Act is a product regulation, the one who basically brings the product to the market needs to comply to all this regulation. But this company depends on all its suppliers in order to really comply then at the end with all the requirements. Coming from security, so there is a common criteria certification scheme, a security certification scheme, where there is a concept of composite certification, meaning that if you have a product which has need to fulfill certain security requirements, but you are integrating a lot of different security components from different suppliers, you can basically certify those components by itself. And when you're integrating them, you basically just need to make sure that you are using it as intended, and you don't no longer need to go through a whole certification process for this component. So looking at AI systems, and we have a similar situation there, that you use different components, models coming from supplier A, data is coming from supplier B, maybe you integrate those things, other components are putting on top. So this idea of shared responsibilities and the idea of maybe having component certification. So do you have any thoughts on that, how the regulation, for example, is dealing with that kind of question? Gabriele?
I think that this question around responsibility in the value chain has been quite an extensively debated discussion in the negotiation about the AI Act. The Commission approach was to essentially focus on the end provider, so the provider who would take responsibility to place a certain system that, of course, would be high risk on the market, and therefore leave to the end provider the responsibility to arrange contractually with its suppliers of, as you say, we know the final AI system is the product of a plurality of components. Some of them actually could be just freely available, like open source. Some of them could be indeed sourced contractually by the providers. So making sure that indeed that overall integration of those components into the final product actually meets the law. I think this concept, from my perspective, is still valid. I mean, this is also what applies to other, let's say, sophisticated industries and complex products. But of course, those, let's say, contractual terms between providers to ensure that indeed you do actually receive the information necessary to ensure compliance work. So this is where, in my view, this approach needs to rest on, that you properly have the ability of the actors in the value chain to ensure that the final end provider does have the information to ensure compliance. Of course, this could be also complemented by something more. I mean, actually, in the final text of the AI Act, we do have some additions made in terms of responsibilities along the value chain, foreseeing the possibilities that I believe the AI office should come up with certain model contract terms, so ensuring that the contractual terms between the different providers in the AI value chain are fair, and ensuring that therefore the end user has the information that is needed. This is where I think the final landing zone is. It could be even be more at some moment, as you mentioned. There could be even proper scheme for certifying certain components. It's true. I mean, this is not where we are right now, but I think depending on whether indeed how this works in practice, because ultimately the final result that we want is that when there is a high risk application on the market, that high risk application, the final provider can fulfill its responsibilities properly and has all the needed information. What is the best tool to achieve that information? You want to leave it free to the market, model contract terms, or actually certification of certain components. I think all these options are valid. I think this need to be based on actual evidence, what is working and what is not working. But certainly we start, from some solution that is on paper yet, and we'll see how that works in practice.
Now, Jeremy, what are your thoughts on that, especially considering that Microsoft has various roles, right? It provides AI products, but also provides AI components to their customers.
That's a great question. And I think on one hand, it does highlight, the complexity of regulating AI, because this is such an increasingly different set and amount of players and actors and components that are involved. So you do see that complexity, but I kind of agree with where Gabriele mentioned it. It makes sense. And I think the Commission did indeed start out with focusing a lot more on that end provider role. And that makes sense when we're looking at that application layer, when there's a decision made there to deploy this in a high risk scenario. And that's often where the decision is before it's put on the market. It's only natural that the responsibility for that decision also comes with a responsibility to ensure that risks have been mitigated. The challenge, however, is when that decision is made at that layer, some of the ways in which you would mitigate risks may have occurred already at many, many component layers beneath that. So I think the AI Act does include, a good faith obligation to support some of the documentation requirements and risk mitigation measures that end provider may have before they can deploy on the market. And, that makes sense. And I think we're seeing an expectation of that from customers, of course. If they're going to use some of our components or our systems or combine those with systems from others, and deploy that, particularly in high risk context, they're going to require different types of documentation and assurances, whether through contracts or even certifications that can help go a long way to making sure they're building with certified, safe sets of components. You'll continue to see that chain expand. So I think, the good news is there's a lot of awareness from customers and deployers in that context. And there's an expectation from their side that the systems they're using to build these end products are certified or safe, and that the companies they're working with are able to provide the type of documentation needs to make sure that their own risk profiles, of course, are mitigated. So there's a good faith obligation in the EU AI Act. I think it does reflect the fact that different layers of the stack have different possibilities to make different decisions, and you need to tailor the rules accordingly. But I think it's a great example of just how complex an ecosystem there may be. And it relates a little bit to what I had said earlier around the importance of those KYC concepts from financial services and the like. It's knowing what cloud you're working on, knowing who your customer is and how they intend to use some of these products, and knowing the content at the output side. So I think some of that's reflected and kind of highlights the probably increasingly future direction of AI regulation as well. There are different decisions that are made at different layers, with different information available. And sometimes, impossibility to even know exactly all of the different ways a customer may deploy and get creative with some of these systems. But being in control of where you are in the stack, or being in control of what you can control, is only natural. And making sure that there are some of those good faith obligations to support compliance along the ecosystem and along that value chain, I think the Act also reflects that.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I think it's time to come to the end of today's podcast. Thank you very much, both of you, for the very interesting discussion today. There was very good questions, very interesting to hear your thoughts on all this kind of topic. So I would like to give you the chance to share your final thoughts with the audience, beginning with you, Jeremy. Any final thoughts you would like to share?
Well, thank you, first of all, for the opportunity. I think it's important to have these conversations, and I think it's going to be important to have these conversations moving forward. I think everyone can see that we're quite excited about the AI opportunity and what this technology can bring, but we certainly don't want to minimize the risks. And that's exactly what regulation can help mitigate, and we're seeing that happen around the world. This is not something that technology companies can do on their own. Governments are going to need to move quickly, and everyone has a shared responsibility in that space. So as excited as we are, it's more important than ever to make sure that there's trust in these systems and that we have the right rules in place. So appreciate any opportunity to have these conversations and those dialogues. And I don't think that the EU AI Act will be the last piece of AI regulation, either in Europe or anywhere in the world. So as this technology continues to advance and we continue to be excited about it, our customers will continue to do more and more exciting things with it. And we'll learn about some of the new exciting opportunities and also some of the new challenges that need to be mitigated and the risks alongside that. So thank you for the opportunity to have the conversation. And we're really excited about the direction that much of this technology and rulemaking is going to go.
Thank you very much. Any final thoughts from your side, Gabriele?
As well, just want to thank you, Tomislav and Jeremy, for this conversation. I think it was really interesting conversation. I enjoyed it a lot. So in terms of final thoughts, I think just one maybe quick message in the sense that, as was mentioned before, the end of the legislative phase of the AI Act, we're going to have the AI Act published soon in the official journal. Doesn't mean the end of the work in terms of, implementing the AI Act in a real life setting, really assessing the impact of the AI Act. So of course, the success of the AI Act depends a lot also indeed on its proper implementation. And so it's time now, the new implementation phase is open up, and it still remains important for, for companies, the tech industry, or all stakeholders really, to continue remaining engaged with, in particular, the Commission, but all the institutions in general, to ensure that indeed the implementation of the AI Act will move in a proper and reasonable manner in order to ensure that AI is trustworthy in the EU market, so we can really reap the benefits of the AI while making sure that we cater for the challenges.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much to both of you for attending and participating to this podcast and sharing your thoughts. It was a very interesting discussion. And I'm looking forward to where the journey goes with the AI and the regulation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As we conclude this second episode of the Changing Conversations podcast, we've gained valuable insights into the crucial role of regulation in the AI landscape. We discussed the role and challenges of the TIC industry, how rapid development of AI technology is addressed, and about the shared responsibility across the AI technology stack. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated with future episodes. A special thanks to our guests for sharing their expertise and perspectives.